Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's LinkedIn Live. I do these every last Wednesday of the month at noon Eastern. And yes, I am as shocked as you probably are that it is already the last Wednesday of the month. Where is the time going? So I love to have these. They're about a half hour long based on questions that I get from you. And so always please feel free to submit your questions to me, or I'll be inspired by them when we just are talking casually sometimes as well. And so this week we are going to be talking about AI. And by the way, for those of you who have been to my prior LinkedIn lives, I am not, this will be recorded and you will be able to access the recording from my profile on LinkedIn, but it will not be turned into a podcast episode. So feel free to, be as crazy as you want to be. Just so you know, it is unfortunately one way, so I can't see you out there. And also, as we go through, feel free to drop your comments or questions in the chat box. I have noted that there is a pretty good delay, a couple of minutes long delay, which can seem like an eternity when I'm sitting here and not being able to see you. And so I will also warn you at the end before we end that for any final questions or comments. But I always welcome your questions and comments. So I did ask ahead for questions about today, and I got such a wonderful, juicy one that it will be what I'm going to cover the whole. I'm going to devote the entire session to it. And so thank you, Megan, for your question. And so she asked, about how to use AI to help create a curriculum using her own IP without permitting AI to use her IP for outputs for other users and without causing her curriculum to become part of the public domain and therefore not eligible for copyright protection. And so, whether intended or not, this question gets to the crux of the legal issues that we have when we are using AI in our businesses. On the one hand, when we think about AI, and I'm coming from the assumption that everyone has a general understanding of generative AI for tools like ChatGPT. And if you do not, I do have some other podcasts that do kind of cover more of the basics. But the issues that we have when we're using generative AI are on the input side or the training data that goes in, and on the output side, like what is generated and how we use that. And the key legal issues regarding training data, which is that, the massive amounts of data that is put into the data set that is part of an algorithm that they can learn, the platforms, the models, AI models learn, how to talk or how to think or how to draw or how to code using those massive data sets. And then they learn patterns from them, and then they can take those patterns and create new content. So that's why it's generative. It's not just, computing. It is actually generating new content, kind of by being able to make predictions based on what they've learned from the data set. And so that's what's going into the on the inputs for that black box that is generative AI. And then on the other end, we have what is the output, what is kicked out after you put in a prompt, and ChatGPT, for instance, provides you with a blog post or a script or something like that, and whether or not what is generated is eligible for copyright protection. Just so you know, I only talk about US law, and so these issues will be from a US law perspective. So first, when we talk about the training data, again, we have the question about if I use some of my IP, I put some of my IP into the AI prompt and to help me, maybe she wants to, add some provisions to it. Maybe she wants to change, I have this issue where sometimes I'll write something and it's, for a lawyer and I need to like, no, can you rewrite this so it's for someone who's not a lawyer? And so there are a number of really good reasons to use AI. I'm pro AI, by the way. And so, but what happens when we put something in the prompt? And so, where does training data come from? We know it comes from web scraping. And by the way, I'm always hopeful that my fonts are big enough because they always seem pretty small to me because I have a very small kind of screen on mine. Um, and I also ask for slides anytime you want slides. So we know that originally, it was web scraping, and presumably it was done for all uh, websites that were not behind a paywall and that weren't otherwise restricted. And you send those crawlers out there, and they bring in massive amounts of data, massive amounts of data required for Gen AI models. But if you're following the news regarding these things, we know that there are a lot of legal challenges associated with that web scraping because one, is if I put in, a book, someone's novel, even though presumably I couldn't get a copy of the novel out of Gen AI, is just including it in the data, the training set, copyright infringement if you don't have my permission. And so that's being litigated. We also have litigation about sometimes we do have verbatim output. So the big New York Times suit against OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, is that you can actually get verbatim New York Times articles as the output. And so web scraping has traditionally been how that massive amounts of data was collected, but it is shifting to the second source, which is licensed data sets. Right now, there's a mad scramble to license very large owned data sets. So things like, archives like the Associated Press, aggregators like Getty Images, where the AI platforms are now getting licensed data. Obviously, it's very hard to do that on an individual basis to license a billion or so data points. That's why, people with large databases, universities and research organizations, film studios, people who have this lots and lots of data are, having these great deals that are being struck right now. But more importantly to you and I as users of AI, they get training data from us as users. And so when we put information into a prompt, that goes into the data set. I am in a minute going to talk about specifically about ChatGPT's terms of use, so you can see an example of how our data can be used when we include it in prompts. So back to our question, how do I prevent what the IP that I am putting into a prompt? How do I prevent it? I don't know, say prevent it, or let me just go back to it. Without permitting AI to use that IP. And so the answer to that is it will depend, and that's favorite answer of lawyers, but it does depend. It will depend on which platform you are using. There are most general kind of open, and by that I mean just without having a closed data set, but has an open data set. They will say in their terms of use, you need to read those terms of use, need to read the privacy policies, because they will tell you how they will use the prompts. And generally they are included in the training data. And it is possible, if it's in the training data, then it is possible that it will be the output for someone else's prompt. If we go to the New York Times example for a second, back to that, The reason AI, the reason AI, OpenAI is kind of fighting this, this verbatim output of New York Times articles is because the New York Times has used prompts that are so specific that it would basically point to that article. I mean, for the most part, if we are putting in a general prompt like, tell me, like I put in the other day, like, what are people asking about AI? Like, it's a very general prompt. So it's going to be looking through, its billions of data points to generate an answer for me. Versus if I say, what did the New York Times have to say about, um, jury selection in a trial? Well, then maybe it will point directly to that article. And so when we are using our data as a prompt, which then goes into the training data set, you know, the likelihood of someone getting something out directly, kind of depends on if they're putting in a prompt. Like I say, like let's just assume they have my something from my website in there. And someone says, what did Aaron Austin write about AI training data on, April 24th? And so they might actually get it right back out. But why use AI that way, honestly? Like why that's not generally why you'd use Gen I. You just go to my website or you put it in Google. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It does happen, it is, so we do need to be careful, I guess. So I want you to, the answer is you need to look at the terms and conditions to see how they will use the information that you input. There are some AI generated platforms, AI powered platforms that collect pretty confidential information. And so, for instance, DocuSign has an AI powered process. And so they will say, in their terms and conditions that they will strip out, personally identifiable information. I don't know if they can strip out all the business terms. I do need to look more at that. But when if you've used DocuSign, it'll have your name and your contact information in there. And so they're not going to put that in their database. What I don't know is do they put in, if it's like, a deal, a confidential deal between two companies, is that information going into the database? I would assume that it does not, because why would anyone use it if that was the case? For my purposes, for lawyers, we are told do not put anything in that AI prompt that is confidential. You will be breaching your client's confidential information if you put that in the prompt. And so we should be thinking about that when we're, in this case, using AI to improve, something that's our own IP, to be mindful of the fact that it will go into the training database and someone might get access to it. Now, in this instance, this example, someone was creating a curriculum. Well, that curriculum will be public, so it's not confidential information. So we're not doing that. And don't forget that you don't lose. Well, I guess that's part of part two. But for the copyrighted information that you put into a prompt, you do not lose copyright, the copyright rights that you have in the information that you add into the prompt. You do not give it up by virtue of putting it in there. You do give the data set access to it. So you're basically consenting to them having access to it, but you're not giving them permission to copy it. And the things that are still subject to exclusive copyrights, you do not give that up just by virtue of using the training database. All right, so that brings us to whether or not what we get out would be copyrightable. And so I always worry about using the term copyrightable, but that just means that is that work, is that content, is that material, is it eligible for copyright protection? And so when we're thinking about the output from AI, we need to look at it at a couple of different levels. So here we're going to start with AI as a tool. So if we just use something to polish something up, for instance, let's say, Hemingway Editor, which you put it in there and then it just makes it simpler and streamlines it, or to use Photoshop. These are things that are AI assisted tools, and they help us kind of, take some of the kinks out and polish up some work that we're working on. And those things are generally considered copyrightable. That's not kind of creating new content. They're not creating something new. They're just polishing up something that you put in there. And so as a rule, AI as a tool, that work will still have copyright protection. AI as the co-author. I think that's what a lot of us worry about, where we maybe we put in an outline and then we have them fill out the outline. Or maybe we say, okay, I've got this 200 word blog post, but I need it to be 400 words. So, expand it. Or we say, okay, I've got this podcast and I put it in there and say, create a bunch of social media posts out of it. And so when we do that, when AI is the co-author of the work, then it does not defeat the copyrightability of the entire work. But what does happen is the copyright protection attaches only to the human authored parts of it. So it's not always simple. Like sometimes it's very easy, like you have some text and then you ask AI to make some illustrations to go with it. It's very clear what's human created and what's AI created. Sometimes it's not that simple, but it is our responsibility, if we want to have copyright protection, to be able to determine and to disclose to the Copyright Office what parts are human authored and what parts are not. Because at the end of the day, when we claim copyright ownership, it is on us to prove our rights in there. And so, it depends, but basically the human authored parts will still have copyright protection and the AI authored parts will not have copyright protection. And that is because of this third piece, that AI cannot be an author under US copyright law. US copyright law specifically requires that copyrightable works be authored by human beings. And that applies whether it's, machine learning or an animal or nature, like whatever it is, if it's not a human, this is unique to copyright because you can have, an AI generated trademark that you might be able to register if it meets all the other requirements for trademark. But under copyright, it must be human, created by human. So back to our original question, how do I prevent my curriculum that has been either improved or polished or added to by AI to not be in the public domain? And just public domain means it's not protected by intellectual property laws. So so AI generated content is in the public domain because it is not eligible under copyright protection. So how do I prevent that from happening? Well, we want to make sure that we still have enough human creativity in that end product, in that curriculum, that it would still be eligible for copyright protection. So in the example of the curriculum, if you are starting with, I'm not going to remember the word, it's not agenda, that you have for curriculum. There's a list of what you're covering. And if you're just going in with that and you say, okay, I want to teach leadership, how to lead new employees and how to be a heart-centered leader. And here are some of, the things that I've said about it in the past. And then you ask it to fill out the curriculum. Well, how much of that is human authored? Even though your ideas are in there, ideas and authorship are not the same. So how much of it is actually human authored? So you put in your agenda, that's not the word either, and you get out a rough draft of a curriculum, and then you add to it. We're using typically, even when we get something off of AI, we're adding our own voices to it, right? We all have our own voices. That's why people come to us and not to somebody else. And so we are adding that layer of human creativity on top, but we definitely want to be aware of that. And so I wanted to kind of go over ChatGPT terms just as an illustration. I do pick on them a lot because they're the ones I know the best. And this is probably the tiniest font you've ever seen on a slide. But so I asked ChatGPT, provide the paragraphs where you cover, how data that is included in prompts can be used. And that they came back with 4 responses. It's all in the same output. Regarding ownership of rights, you continue to own everything that you put into the prompt, so you don't lose ownership of it. That's still your work. You do not lose ownership of it. You also own whatever is kicked out. However, they do not give you any reps and warranties about its originality or accuracy or anything like that. So you can't just take output and say, great, I'm good to go. Let me put it in, a report or in a client deliverable or whatever and go with it. Because you don't know, they can only give you the rights that they have in it. So if they don't have, it's AI generated, so they can't give you copyrightable rights. And it may or may not be original or somebody else's. So they can't give you anything that they don't already own. So we must be aware of that. Use of content. OpenAI may use the content you provide to maintain, develop, and improve its services. This includes training their models, enforcing terms and policies, and ensuring the safety. Now, this was interesting to me. It says that you can opt out of having your data used in the training model. I'm not familiar with it, so I'm now going to have to go and find that and see how that works. But it may affect the service's ability to cater to specifically to your needs. Basically, I think they're telling you you're going to get a crap response if you don't let them use your data. And again, they're disclaiming any reps or warranties about accuracy and reliability. And they are asking you to indemnify them against third-party claims for your using their services. So, for instance, if you copy someone's book and put it wholly in there, upload the whole thing into that, and then and it's determined to be copyright infringement, that's still being litigated. If it's determined that that is a copyright infringement, then you're indemnifying them for that use. So we do need to be mindful of how we use it. But again, I am pro AI. It's a great tool, but we do need to be mindful of how we're using it, that those inputs can become part of the training data. Don't put anything confidential in there. Don't be afraid to use it for your non-confidential work, like creating a curriculum, because you do not lose your copyrights in that original material. And be mindful of how we use the output, because there's no guarantees that it's not copied from somebody else's work, and that if we use it without layering on our own human creativity, we do not have a copyrightable work, and it would be in the public domain. So I know I said I was going to warn you when I was wrapping up so you could get ahead of the curve in adding any comments. I do have one here that says the AI. Oh, I know. I'm allowed to do this. Let's see here. Put it in the ban show. There we go. I knew there was a way to do this. The AI world is obviously changing so quickly. I would hope in the future they would have a toggle each time you input as to what, oh, well, this is it, as to whether or not you want to contribute to the larger public data set rather than having to go through a closed platform. That is very interesting. I mean, that is really where a lot of the advances in AI is happening right now, is how to deal with getting consent from all the billions of pieces of information that are in data sets. And I guess, one way to start is with, asking for consent, at least with respect to the prompts that we're using. And I wonder, that's a great question. Maybe that is what the open AI is referring to, is the ability to opt out. I would love to know. I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to look at that before we started. But that, if they don't have that, then maybe that's a suggestion we need to make. Because I think that would be really powerful, and it would give us all a lot of comfort. Now, with that, as I mentioned, lawyers, it doesn't matter whether or not it says they're going to use it. I have access to a contract review specific, and it's specifically marketed to, I don't know if you have to be a member of the bar to use it. You might have to. That you specific marketed specifically to lawyers to do contract review. And it basically is inside of Word. It's an add-on to Word. And so you're in there, you're viewing the document, you click on it, it reads the whole thing, and then it can tell you, oh, it's missing this, it's missing that. And it tells you, and it's a big part of their sales part of their marketing, is that the agreements do not enter their data training set. They have it wherever they source their original training data set. Your agreement does not go into that. And I was at a CLE where I mentioned this, and their recommendation is, still, you just can't trust these things because you just don't know. You really just never know what can slip through. And so when we use things like that, we want to make sure the parties' identities are stripped out of it. So until we are in a world with full transparency about what goes in and what does not go in, we do need to just keep that in mind, that it may end up inside of a training data set. So I am going to hang around for a couple more minutes until 12:30 to see if there are any other answers. Otherwise, I thank you very much for joining me. And again, the recording will be available on my profile. And I think the slides are there too. If they're not, then you can just hit me up and I'll get them to you.